Um, Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I'm Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, and we're here at the headquarters of our Organized Crime Task Force to announce the results of Operation Yellow Brick Road, a major takedown of violent drug dealers operating here in the Hudson Valley. I'm very proud to be joined here today by my colleagues in law enforcement, Sean Benedict, Special Agent in charge of the New York Field Office of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, a terrific partner, and others from the New York Field Office. They have been great allies and partners in this and other matters. We're also very pleased to be joined by the District Attorney of Orange County, David Hoovler, Ken Jones, the Undersheriff of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and others who have worked with us on this matter. The partnership between federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies here has been seamless, and it has been a great pleasure to work with all these agencies. Also, I'm joined by Perry Kadenoff, who runs my Organized Crime Task Force, and by Shannon LaCourte, an Assistant Deputy Attorney General in our office who is in charge of this very important investigation and now prosecution. So we're here today to announce a 172-count indictment against 16 people for their alleged roles in a heroin and cocaine trafficking ring that poisoned communities in the Hudson Valley. This was a sophisticated operation based in the city of Newburgh, but they sold drugs in counties all around Newburgh, stamping their heroin with brand names including Public Enemy, Focus, Shine, and X-Men. Their supply lines extended to New York City for heroin and Paterson, New Jersey for cocaine. The nexus of these two distribution networks, we allege, was an individual named Damian Jackson. And the gang used a complicated set of code words, including brick to refer to 50 glassine bags of heroin. They would comment on the tan or yellow appearance of higher quality heroin. And the man at the center of this alleged conspiracy, Damian Johnson, was actually nicknamed Toto, hence Operation Yellow Brick Road. This operation began last spring in partnership with the City of Newburgh Police Department and quickly expanded to include the county and federal partners who are here with us today. Their assistance was critical, and once again, this was really a seamless operation and a model of the kind of cooperation we need to address the drug epidemic we're facing. So my office, I want to note, has been involved for several years in efforts to revitalize the city of Newburgh. We have provided more than $6 million in funding to the Newburgh Community Land Bank, but we quickly learned that crime and drug dealing in particular was a major impediment to efforts to revitalize Newburgh. So we reached out to the police department, began to work together, and working with our local and federal partners, our team deployed every tool in our toolbox to uncover and dismantle this drug ring. We made extensive use of wiretaps, hidden cameras and surveillance, GPS devices, physical surveillance. We had undercover agents and cooperating witnesses. It was an outstanding investigation, really, and as a result, the gang that supplied more than 200 daily customers with cocaine and heroin is out of business, and many of the customers of this drug ring were themselves drug dealers. So this was really a vast network dealing death throughout the Hudson River Valley. When we made the arrest this morning, and I'm pleased to report that we have now apprehended 16 out of the 16 members of the gang, we caught some of the suspects attempting to dispose of evidence. The primary alleged supplier of cocaine, Kennedy Richards, was attempting to flush a large quantity of cocaine down the toilet, which his plumbing couldn't quite handle. So when our agents arrived, we found that his efforts were largely incomplete, and in fact, we recovered from Mr. Richards' stash house. He had fled from his residence to his stash house, but because of our really thorough surveillance, we knew where that was, and were able to get to the stash house. In addition to recovering cocaine, he had 1 kilo of methamphetamine in the stash house, 40 pounds of marijuana and tens of thousands of dollars of cash. In the course of this operation, we also took illegal guns off the street, and you can see some here, including a sawed-off shotgun that we picked up on wiretaps, them discussing how they needed that to, because it was easier to conceal. It's important to note that, as with many of these gangs, they were violent, they were armed, and this kind of an enterprise was not something that they did casually. This was a serious business. They knew they were dealing death, they knew they were taking risks, and they armed themselves appropriately. For their respective roles in this alleged conspiracy, each of the defendants faces up to 25 years in prison, and we do want to send a message with this takedown. Our communities refuse to live in fear, and the drug crisis and the violence that comes with it, we know now, has been catastrophic, particularly for small cities, rural communities, and towns, and many local authorities are overwhelmed by the problem. Our office stepped up to help. Last April, we launched the Surge Initiative, which is a targeted effort to collaborate with state and local law enforcement to root out violent gangs and drug dealers, and really to help local police departments move up the food chain to take people at the higher levels of the enterprise. The Surge Initiative stands for Suburban and Upstate Response to the Growing Epidemic, focusing on communities like Newburgh that have been hard hit by drug trafficking and need the additional resources. The rate of drug-related deaths, we know, is rising about twice as fast in our suburbs and smaller cities and towns than it is in New York City, and we are committed to addressing that crisis with all the tools at our disposal. In less than a year since we launched the Surge Initiative, we've already arrested almost 300 dealers from across the state, from Buffalo to St. Lawrence County, from Rochester to Albany. Collectively, we've charged them with more than 1,300 crimes, including conspiracy to commit murder and operating as a major trafficker. This builds on the work of our Organized Crime Task Force over the years and expands our successful collaboration with partners across the state. Particularly the help of local law enforcement is essential. They know their communities the best, and we're very much committed to letting them make critical judgment calls. So I want to make it clear that everyone we have arrested is charged with very serious crimes. People struggling with addiction are not and never will be the targets of the Surge Initiative or any of the other initiatives in our office. That is why our office is joined with other government agencies and advocacy groups to help lead an all-levers approach to the narcotics and opioid crisis, including enforcement, treatment, interdiction, and education. We know our investigations and prosecutions have crippled some of the most violent and prolific drug gangs in our state, but we also know that you can't arrest your way out of a drug epidemic. Prosecutions alone will not end this crisis, and we're very much committed to a multi-layered response. Beyond the work we've done with our partners in law enforcement, we've also helped train and supply law enforcement officials across the state with the overdose antidote naloxone, turning more than $5 million in criminally forfeited funds into more than 50,000 naloxone kits for law enforcement statewide. And we've worked with the manufacturers of this drug to ensure that our first responders can get it at an affordable price. We also recognize that a lot of addiction starts in the medicine cabinet, and that's why we launched the Internet System for Stopping Overprescribing, or iStop, which arms doctors and pharmacists with the information they need to avoid prescribing painkillers to those who are grappling with addiction, while ensuring that patients who truly need the medications get them. And according to the New York State Heroin and Opioids Task Force, since we introduced iStop, doctor shopping was cut by 90%. It's very hard in New York, unlike many other states, to get 2 opioid prescriptions from 2 different doctors. We have also reached agreements with major insurance companies to remove barriers to addiction treatment, and we are now part of a multi-state investigation into whether pharmaceutical companies themselves engaged in unlawful practices in the marketing and distribution of opioids. So this all-levers approach, we believe, is the only way to deal with this national crisis. We are very proud of our collaboration with others in New York State, and we will continue to work with our partners in law enforcement to drive violent drug gangs and drug dealers out of business and to use every other tool, and where there are not tools in the toolbox, we're prepared to invent new tools to deal with the problem. And now I'd like to introduce a terrific partner in law enforcement, someone who also brings great creativity and energy to the effort, Sean Benedict from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Sean, thank you.
Good afternoon. On behalf of ATF, I would like to thank the law enforcement agencies, specifically AG Schneiderman and his office, and the other agencies for working on this case together. It's truly been a real success. ATF and the Department of Justice, we remain committed to protecting the public. We work with our state, local, and federal partners to keep the streets free from individuals that perpetrate violent crime. The 600 gang operates in and around the area of Newburgh, New York. Members of this organization are alleged to have committed numerous acts of violence throughout Orange County. The city of Newburgh has seen the many issues that accompany the heroin and opioid addiction problem that many of our American cities face. This epidemic has created fertile ground for the growth of criminal organizations and violent street gangs. Today, law enforcement sent a strong message that there is hope on the horizon for communities like these, and that we are executing our mission to keep the streets safe for each and every citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should note that the reference to the 600 gang, a large group of the folks who we have arrested referred themselves to as the 600 gang, which is a reference to a larger Chicago-based enterprise, but that was how they were referred to in Newburgh. So they were well known to everyone in the community as being a big part of the problem. And now another great partner in these efforts, presiding over the largest growing county and fastest growing county in the state, Orange County District Attorney David Hoover.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Schneiderman. First, I want to commend your staff on a very well investigated case. It's a pleasure to stand up here when you have state, local, and federal law enforcement working together toward a common goal. In law enforcement, often you have a lot of rivalries between agencies. Let me tell you, this case started, and as it developed, the Attorney General's office contacted my office. We worked hand in hand. We shared resources. We shared undercover officers. We shared in the labors to bring this case to fruition, because public safety is what's important to me as the District Attorney of Orange County, and working with our partners in this case shows that when you work collaboratively and everyone shares in the credit, we make our communities safer, and that's my message here today. And again, it's a pleasure working with your agency and these professionals up here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. And as you can see here, we've recovered a lot of drugs. We've recovered cash. We've recovered guns. Again, as of this morning, we had successfully arrested all of the members of this particular drug gang, and we look forward to moving ahead quickly with prosecutions. And with that, if you'll identify yourselves to Amy, she will take on-topic questions first. Well, I think partly, and I think Sean may have a comment on this, but partly it's because the rate of growth of drug use really just exploded in rural and suburban areas. There were issues in New York City, but law enforcement had time to develop a much more sophisticated approach to it. The NYPD is a great law enforcement agency, and but this is also a problem that's reflected nationally, that the growth of drug abuse, particularly opioids, in small cities, towns, and rural areas is a national phenomenon. This is not something that's limited to New York State or particular to New York City and areas outside of New York City. But to the extent there were drug problems, there was a lot of concentration in cities, and law enforcement in the cities developed alternatives. Drug courts were developed in New York City before they were developed in the rest of the state. So both at the level of law enforcement and the other multi-layer approach that I suggested of treatment, education, there was just more development earlier in the cities. But I don't know, Dashan, do you want to speak to that?
No, that's...
Oh, okay, got that.
Are the operations run differently?
Well, you also are dealing with the fact that in some areas, the police departments are very small. I mean, we had one of our major surge initiatives was up in the North Country, in St. Lawrence County. You're talking about very small police departments. Doing more than just taking a drug dealer off the corner is challenging. Doing an operation like this where you have wiretaps and undercovers and physical surveillance really requires additional resources, and that's what we're trying to provide and trying to leverage the resources of all of our partners in law enforcement to help smaller law enforcement agencies deal with the problem.
The poster behind you, the surge statistics, does that include today's takedown?
Yes, that does. But it's
I see, okay.
and it's important to understand that this is a very new initiative. This was launched last spring, so it's already yielding these results. And obviously, we plan to continue it. But we're in a process of evolution nationally at recognizing and dealing with this problem, and it's something we're very much committed to at every level.
And are you asking for support from the community to help you with your surge initiatives? Tell me about that.
Well, we've always encouraged community support. We get a lot of support from whistleblowers. Informants were critical to a lot of our investigations, so we ask for community support. As far as support from the community, local governments and law enforcement agencies, it's been outstanding uniformly, and certainly it was in this case.
According to the spectrum, can you talk some more about the other parts of this process to combat this epidemic, the ways like trying to reduce people going from doctor to doctor, or people trying to get drugs from the internet, and how your work office is working to reduce overconsumption that way?
Well, the most important step we took, and we really feel that this is confident this is a national model, was to look at the prescription drug monitoring programs around the country and come up with the iStop system, which is, to me, no doubt, the most effective prescription drug monitoring system in the country, because our system, unlike many other states, requires both pharmacists and doctors to consult a real-time database that will tell them if I have 1 oxycodone prescription or 5, gives them all the information they need to avoid prescribing to people who have an addiction problem, but making sure that folks who need the drugs can get them. And again, doctor shopping dropping 90% since the beginning of this, since it was introduced in a number of years ago, is a remarkable statistic. We also have been experimenting in New York, and it's now expanding to other parts of the state, with drug courts, with diversion programs to try and distinguish, which we can do with a fairly high degree of accuracy, addicts who steal to support their habit from gangsters who like to get high. Those have been tremendously successful. Education programs, diversion and alternative programs, removing barriers that insurance companies were posing to treatment was a huge problem a number of years ago, and that's something that we've effectively addressed with a number of major settlements, so that you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops before you can actually get treatment. The movement for mental health parity, or parity for mental health issues or things like addiction with physical illness, has been a problem with health insurance for a long time, but we've made major strides in the last couple of years to break through on that level. And then there has been some attention to the fact that there is a major multi-state investigation involving more than 40 different states, including our office, into the practices of opioid manufacturers and distributors to see if they should bear some burden for the havoc that's been wreaked by the abuse of their products. So it's really multi-layered and multi-levered, and this is, to me, the only way we're going to be able to combat this crisis.
And just on that last point about the manufacturers, what are you seeing there, and what is your belief about what's happening and has happened?
That's an ongoing investigation that we're involved with other states, and we're in the process of gathering information right now, and when we have completed that, we will make our findings known.
But when did that start? Basically, what's the crux of what you're trying to look for?
Well, this is something that has been going on for, I don't know, certainly in the last year or so. There were isolated investigations going on, but now there's been an effort to pull together a lot of the investigations so that we can present a united front. There also has been an effort to consolidate other cases brought against opioid manufacturers in a multi-district litigation in a court in Ohio. So the big change is now that there's a consolidation of these efforts, and the question really is, was there anything about marketing and distribution practices, incentives provided, that might have contributed to this crisis? Were the distributors identifying suspicious orders in ways they were required to? There are a whole variety of issues that are being looked at in that context.
Is there any data so far on how many of these arrests have actually led to convictions?
We don't have that. Since this only started last spring, we're at a relatively early stage of the process, but it's proceeding well.
How does your kind of interdepartmental collaboration help people ensure that
How do we what?
how does the interdepartment, you talked a lot about the collaboration between different organizations, how is that helping their efforts into bringing these to court and getting these charges?
Oh, this is absolutely essential. I mean, having the local police departments and district attorneys' offices involved, they know the lay of the land, they know the players, they know the communities. Absolutely essential. The expertise of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is extraordinary here. The ability to facilitate wiretaps, to facilitate physical surveillance. Everyone brings different things to the table, and the collaboration, the lack of ego involved. The district attorney mentioned, and in some points there have been rivalries between law enforcement agencies. People are uniting in the face of this crisis, and it makes all the difference in the world. And as far as the prosecutions go, I don't have the numbers. Every case that has been completed so far has led to a conviction or a plea. So there's no one who has gotten off yet since we started the Surge Initiative.
Are there any other questions? Off the topic questions?
Sure.
Back there, no.
Andy Madison, Class 1 News. I know you announced a lawsuit against the Weinstein company. There's a chance they might go bankrupt. If that happens, what happens to the money that's set aside for victims?
Well, as of right now, as we announced yesterday, there is no money set aside for the victims. So we filed the lawsuit primarily because we were concerned that the deal discussions that were in the works did not take into account the evidence that we had unearthed in our investigation, and we wanted to make sure that whatever deal is ultimately reached, whether it involves a bankruptcy or not, it takes into account the facts of systemic discrimination, abuse, and harassment that really went beyond any individual perpetrator and had to do with a corporate culture of toleration, enablement, and cover-up of this sort of conduct. Our principles are very simple in what we hope will come out of a deal, which is securing adequate compensation for victims. And again, there was no victims' compensation fund on the table. There's a notion that something was out there. It was not. There were some insurance policies that would cover more than victim compensation. We want to make sure victims are compensated. We want to make sure employees are protected going forward, and we want to make sure those who participated in or enabled this sort of activity do not benefit from the deal. I do want to note that our petition, which was filed and then made public yesterday, does not suggest or state that everyone involved in the Weinstein companies was complicit. In fact, we received tremendous assistance from some former employees, company insiders, including the chief accounting officer, Erwin Reiter, who provided tremendous assistance to help really jumpstart our investigation. And rather than being involved in the cover-up, there were people in the company who tried to do the right thing. There were people filing complaints, as we detail in our petition. They just weren't followed up on by some of the people who were in charge of human resources and in taking care of things like that. But people like Erwin Reiter did the right thing. A lot of people have come forward. Many of them have wanted their identities concealed, which we respect. So we have a lot of references generally to employees or sometimes female employees. But there are a lot of people in the company who really did try and do the right thing over the years, and some people like Mr. Reiter who made a huge contribution to the investigation. So we are hopeful that the company will survive and that the good people in the company will be able to go on and do their work. But whatever deal is consummated can't be completed without taking into account the allegations of systemic abuse, discrimination, and harassment that we set forth in our petition.
National intelligence officials testified in Washington today that they believe the Russians would try to influence the midterm election. What concerns do you have about that in New York State, and what should New York State try to do to prevent that?
We have been very involved in looking at the technical sides of this and beginning our work on bots, really with our tickets investigation, but extending it to the issue of the corruption of the rulemaking process at the Federal Communications Commission with fake comments and stolen identities. We are certainly are concerned about the election. Any interference in any of our governmental processes, whether it is an election or the rulemaking process, is something that every American of no matter what your political party or persuasion should be concerned about. There are proposals for legislation at both the state and the federal level to require more transparency or to prohibit this sort of activity. I don't know how likely we are to pass any of those things, but this is something that should not be a partisan issue. This is an attack on our democratic processes, our bedrock institutions themselves. So it's not something that really falls within my wheelhouse particularly, but we support legislation to stop this from happening.
Do you think the Trump administration is taking this seriously?
I'm really not sure.
Other topic questions? Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.